Hey everyone, it's Shelley, and I'm about to teach you something that will literally change your life. I know it's changed my life. I'm going to show you how to be a knitter with a capital K. Not just someone who knows how to knit, but someone who loves to knit. You're going to be walking down the street wearing this amazing infinity scarf, and people are going to ask where you got it, and you're going to be like, oh, I made it. Or you're going to go to the baby shower, and you're going to give the most show-stopping gift, and people are going to say, where did you get that? And you're going to be like, oh, I made it. People wonder, where does she find the time? But the truth is, these projects are easy and fun. They're the kinds of things that you can work on while you're traveling, in the plane or in the car. Easy, mindless projects you can do while you're sitting at soccer practice or even just hanging out with friends, chatting, and having a glass of wine. But I'll let you in on a little secret. It's all about amazing projects and amazing yarns. Over the last 10 years at Loops, we have taught thousands of people to knit. Even the really advanced knitters, people that can do everything from Fair Isle to steeking. But I'll tell you what, even the advanced knitters love an easy, mindless, gorgeous project. They want to really enjoy the yarn. They don't want to have to be constantly checking a chart or looking at their pattern. They want to just enjoy the fiber floating through their fingers and watching something develop into an amazing, beautiful project. You know, we are all so busy these days, and I hear it all the time. People say, oh, I'm too busy to learn how to knit. But the truth is, my best customers are really busy people. People with families and careers and a zillion different hobbies. But they're the kind of people that just can't sit still. What knitting does for them is they're able to be productive at the same time that they're slowing down. You're creating, you're making something real and warm and lasting. You're making things that you can wear that are so unique you won't ever see yourself coming or going. You're making gifts that are really meaningful, that are never going to be returned or regifted, that people are going to hang on to forever. In these 3 free videos, you're going to learn to knit, purl, and yarn over. Along the way, I'm going to give you tips for making your knitting faster, easier, and more enjoyable. And at the end of every video, there's going to be a free pattern. And each of these patterns is going to be really cute and on trend and something you actually want to wear. So whether you're a beginner knitter who's never picked up the needles or a master knitter, you're going to get a lot out of these videos. And at the end of the series, you're going to have 3 projects that you actually are excited to wear out and show off to all your friends. So let's head on back to the Loops classroom. So now we're back in our Loops classroom and we're going to get started. For years at Loops, we've started out beginners with this really nice 100% baby alpaca yarn. We like it for 3 reasons. First of all, it's chunky, so it works up really fast. Secondly, it's smooth, so you can see your stitches develop. And third, it's very, very soft, and I believe in starting beginners out on nice yarn. You should be proud to wear everything you make, including your very first scarf. In our beginner classes, we used to make a 1-skein alpaca scarf, but then something happened. A good friend of mine named Jana sent me pictures from Pinterest of this scarf that she loved. She thought it was so cute, and I thought it would be a fun surprise to make the scarf for her for Christmas. The only problem was the picture was from Pinterest, so there was no pattern. So I studied it for a while and figured out the pattern, and as it turns out, this makes the perfect beginner project. So here's what you're going to need to make Jana's scarf, and I'm wearing it right now. You can see it's just so cushy and comfortable. It's just the cutest piece. It's a great first pattern for you. So what you need to make the scarf are 3 skeins of chunky baby alpaca yarn, and that works out to about 330 yards. And then you're going to need size 17 or size 19 needles. You can use straight needles or circular needles for the project, but we like to start beginners out on bamboo straight needles because they seem to be the easiest for beginners to manage. So the first thing you need to know how to do is how to cast on. For this video, I'm going to teach you what's called the thumb method. It's the easiest method of all to learn. In the next free video, I'm going to show you my very favorite cast-on method, which is the knit-on cast-on. But for now, this one will get us started. It helps to learn the knit stitch before you learn the knit-on cast-on, and you'll see what I'm talking about in the next video. So the first thing you're going to do is to make a slip knot. And here's how you make a slip knot. You make a loop around your finger, just like that. And then you take this tail of your yarn, put it behind, so it kind of looks like a no smoking sign. It's a little buster signal, circle with a line behind it. You pick up one of your needles, and you're going to grab that little bar in the middle of the circle. Go down and up, and there you've got 1 loop on your needle. Then pull on each end of the string or the yarn to pull it taut. And that's your slip knot. So you've got your slip knot on your needle. That becomes your first stitch. Then you're going to hold the yarn in your fingers, and you're going to use your thumb to go over the top of the yarn and around. Then you take your needle and grab the strand on this side of your thumb. And then you just put your next stitch on the needle. And I like to tell people your thumb is doing a somersault over the yarn. A lot of people, the tendency is to go this way, but you need to go over the top of the yarn and then pick it up with your needle. Over, pick it up. Now, a lot of beginners also like to pull the yarn very tight up against the needle. You don't want to do that, because then when you get ready to knit your next row, it's going to be too tight and hard to get those stitches off. So the idea is to just pull it barely up against the needle to where it's snug but not tight. And you just keep continuing like this to cast on. Now, if you want to make a one skein scarf, you can follow this same pattern. You just want to cast on 10 stitches. So I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, one more stitch, 10 stitches. So if you want to just make a one skein scarf, you can start there. But if you're going to make Jana's scarf, you need to continue and cast on 50 stitches. So for this demonstration, I'm only going to cast on 10 stitches because that'll let us get to the end of our row a little quicker, and you can see what happens when you finish a row and start the next one. Okay, so now we're going to learn the knit stitch. There's 4 steps to the knit stitch, and we use a little rhyme or acronym around loops to help our beginners learn the steps. It's called FABO, and I'm going to take it one step at a time and show you each step, and I'll tell you where the rhyme comes from. So the first step is under the fence. That's the F is for fence. You're going to take your right hand needle that doesn't have any stitches on it, go in from left to right into your first stitch. That's under the fence. Just like that. The second step is to take your strand that's attached to your ball of yarn. You're going to go around the back of the bottom needle. When you do this correctly, the yarn's going around the back and through the center of the 2 needles. So again, it's under the fence, around the back. The third step is coming back through the fence or back under the fence. So what you're going to do is bring your right hand needle straight back the opposite direction that you went in. And when you do this, you're going to catch that loop that you wrapped around the needle. So that's back through the fence. So it's under the fence, around the back, back through the fence. And the last step is, the O stands for off jumps Jack. We don't really know who Jack is, but that's the rhyme. And you're going to take the stitch that you've just created off of the left hand stitch onto your right hand stitch. Off jumps Jack. Now the tendency for beginners is to pull this strand very tight. You don't want to pull it too tight. You want to have about this much space between your needles. That's going to help you keep a nice even tension. So you've completed your first stitch. Now you're going to knit your second stitch with the same exact steps. Under the fence, around the back, back through the fence, off jumps Jack. Now you've got 2 stitches. I'm going to keep scooting the yarn down so that my stitches always stay. My next stitch is always about 1 inch back from the tip of the needle. Under the fence, around the back, back through the fence, off jumps Jack. And then you continue across the row. When I'm teaching beginners, I tell them to just keep repeating the same rhyme to themselves. Under the fence, around the back, back through the fence, off jumps Jack. Now again, you want to keep your stitches right at about 1 inch back from the point of your needle, or at the point where it gets to, it forms the fat part of the needle. If you try to work down here on the skinnier part of the needle, you're actually working on a smaller needle at that point. Your work's going to get very tight, and it's not going to have the right gauge for the project that you want to achieve the look that you're after. So always try to keep your work here. Plus, if you keep your work here, it's less likely to accidentally slide off the needle, and you'll be less likely to drop a stitch. So under the fence, around the back, back through the fence, off jumps Jack. Another thing that beginners tend to do is they sort of fight this third step. They go under the fence, they go around the back, and then they want to turn the needles this way to get it back off. Don't fight it, just slide it straight back the opposite way of when you went in. It's like a seesaw. In, around, back through, off. Now over to our last stitch on the needle, or if you're making Jana's scarf, you've knit 50 stitches. We knit the last one just like the rest, and now I've completed my first row. I've got all the stitches, I've moved them all from my left needle over onto my right needle. So now my left needle is empty. So to make your next row, all you're going to do is simply switch hands. Now, after you switch hands, you want to make sure and orient the yarn so that your strand that's attached to your ball is coming straight down off the needle. You also want to be very careful not to knit with this empty tail. We're not going to do anything else with this until we finish the whole scarf, and at the very end we're going to weave it in, and I'll show you how to do that. But we want to just take your time to get your yarn oriented before you start on your second row. Another way to know that you have this correct is that all of the stitches, the little turtlenecks of the stitches, are lined up across the bottom of the needle. So these little bumps are all at the bottom, and then you have the loops going over the top of the needle, as opposed to this or this. You want them just like this. And what's going to happen is we're going to knit more rows, and as you knit more rows, the scarf is going to grow downwards into your lap. So now to knit our second row, again, make sure you're going under the fence from left to right, and when you do this correctly, your needles are touching each other, rubbing against each other. You're not going into these strands that are down here in between the yarn. You're going right below the needle and above the yarn to get into the right spot. And once you find the right spot on that first stitch, you're going to be fine. So it's under the fence, around the back, back through the fence, off jumps Jack. And we're going to continue across this row just like we did the first row. A lot of times also beginners make the mistake of knitting a stitch and then pulling their needles apart like this. What that does is going to stretch out your stitches and make them a lot looser and longer than you really want them. So the optimal way to work is with your needles always about a ½ inch to an inch apart. And when you go into this space correctly, your needles are forming an X. They're not apart like football posts, they're overlapped in an X. These are just little tips to help you keep proper gauge in your project. Your gauge will not be perfect at first, and that's okay. Over time, you'll develop the right gauge for you. Everybody knits a little bit differently. Some people knit tighter, some people knit looser, and your gauge also changes depending on whether you're working with straight or circular needles and the different kinds of yarn you're working with. A lot of people, when they work with linen, work at a looser gauge than they do with other yarns. So don't stress about that. It's all supposed to be relaxing and will become relaxing, and don't worry too much about making your stitches perfect. Now, you're just going to keep knitting your way all the way through this ball of yarn. And if you're making a one skein scarf, you're going to be done and ready to cast off when you finish your first skein of yarn. But if you're making Jana's scarf, you're going to need to attach a second ball of yarn because the project takes 3 balls. Now I'm going to show you how to attach a second ball of yarn to your work. It's really a lot easier than you think. All you do is simply pretend that I've finished knitting with this first ball of yarn, and you leave a tail hanging from your first ball of yarn. And you're going to You pick up the strand of your second ball of yarn, and you just simply go in to knit your first stitch of your row, wrap the new strand around your needle in a loop like this, and then come back through the fence and knit it off onto the other needle. Now it's going to be loose, and that's okay. You just leave a strand hanging of that ball, again about 6 inches. I like to leave all my tails 6 to 10 inches long, so you have plenty to work with at the end of your piece when you weave all of these strands into your work. You don't want to tie a knot, and you don't want to cut, because over time knots can come undone and cut pieces can unravel your work. So you do want to weave in your ends to have a nice firm finish to your piece. So then you just keep knitting from your second ball of yarn, and when you finish that ball of yarn, you attach a third ball of yarn and work with that. And as soon as you finish your third ball of yarn, you're going to be ready to cast off. And trust me, this is going to go a lot faster than you think. You're going to figure out your own rhythm to knitting, and this is so easy. Once you get it down, you can sit and do this while you watch TV or talk with friends or sit at your kids' soccer practice or whatever the case may be. So let's pretend you've almost finished knitting your third ball of yarn and you're ready to cast off. You want to leave about 2 rows worth of yarn for your cast off. To do a cast off row takes about twice as much yarn as an average row. So be safe and don't cut it too close. Leave yourself plenty of yarn for your cast off. What you want to do to cast off is simply knit your first 2 stitches. You knit 2 stitches over onto the right hand needle. Now take your left hand needle, pick up the first stitch that you knit, and leapfrog it over the second stitch, using your finger to keep that second stitch from sliding off the needle. Now you've cast off 1 stitch. You don't need to pull your yarn really tight. In fact, for most projects, they tell you to do a nice loose cast off because that'll leave your edge really stretchy. Then you go in to knit your second stitch, and now you cast off the stitch before that off the needle, and so on, knitting 1 stitch and leapfrogging the previous stitch. And we're going to keep doing this until we get to the very last stitch on the needle. Again, if you're making Jana's scarf, you're going to have 50 stitches, but the same principle, you're going to cast off all of the stitches until you get to the last one. Then you go ahead and knit that last stitch, leapfrog off the previous one, and you've got 1 stitch left on the needle. So now we've knit our last stitch. I've got 1 stitch. That 1 stitch is left on the right hand needle, and there's nothing to leapfrog because you just have 1 stitch. So I'm going to put down my other empty needle. I'm going to take this loop and put it onto my finger. Set down my other needle, get some scissors, and I'm going to cut my yarn, leaving again 6 to 10 inches of yarn. And I'm going to take that piece and I'm just simply going to stick it through that last loop. Either direction, doesn't matter, and pull it tight. And now you've cast off your scarf. So now what you've done is knit a giant rectangle. So you have 2 steps left. The first step is to seam the ends of your rectangle together. So you want to take the short ends of the rectangle, where you cast on and where you cast off. And you know that you cast on and cast off at those points because you've got a strand from when you first cast it on and a strand on the other edge where you first cast it off. So now you're going to seam the 2 ends of your rectangle together to form an infinity scarf. So take the 2 short ends, line them up so that your scarf is formed into a loop. Now take the strand that was from your cast on edge and you're going to thread this into a darning needle. For our darning needles, we like to use this Chibi brand. They have a nice big hole that's easy to get your chunky yarn into. And I like these bent tip. They make different kinds, but I like these bent tip types of needles because they don't split into your yarn as easily. They tend to just kind of flow and they're easier to work with. So I'm going to thread my yarn into my big eye needle. And I'm going to start to seam this together. Now I'm going to use what's called the mattress stitch. For the mattress stitch, we're going to work from the outside of the work. For a lot of seaming, you do it on the back side of the work, but we're going to do it on the right side of the work. We're going to go into this side of the work, and we're going to grab 2 of these little bars, which is half of your V of your knit stitch. Pull the strand up. Then go into the other half. Grab 2 of the bars. Pull the strand up. Go back in on the other side, on the next half of the V. Grab 2 halves of the V. Pull it up. And then back over here, get these 2 halves. Pull it up. And you just continue in that way, grabbing 2 halves of the V from this side, and then 2 halves of the V from this side. Now you're going to see, again, one reason we love this chunky alpaca yarn is even though it's got a nice smooth twist, it's very forgiving. The texture, especially of this tweedy version, really hides any mistakes. So don't stress out about this too much. It's just, you just want to continue going with the flow, grabbing 1 V from each side. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you do want to be mindful of how far you're going and that your sides are matching up. You don't want to get all the way to the end of the scarf and have one side shorter than the other. So I like to stop every few stitches and sort of check myself and make sure I'm lined up, and then I'm going to end at the right point. Another tip that'll help you make sure you get a nice even seam is to take a safety pin or a locking stitch marker and connect your piece at even points all the way down. That'll help make sure that you don't get ahead of yourself from one side to the other. So just continue seaming this all the way until you've seamed the whole scarf together. So the very last step in making your Jana's Infinity scarf is to weave in your loose ends. Now again, there is no perfect way to do this. There's no exact science to this. You just want to hide them so they don't show in your work. And that can really vary from project to project. But in this piece, since we've made what's called a garter stitch and it creates ridges, garter stitch is really easy to hide your work in. And you just want to go, I like to go in the little, in the trough between the ridges. So I'm just going to take one of my tails. I've threaded it onto my chippy needle, and I just like to go in and out of every other half of the V like this and hide that strand. I like to go maybe about 3 inches, 4 inches, and then come back the other direction. Just grab 1 stitch and then go through one of the strands to make it extra secure. And then, at that point, after you've woven it all in, you can go ahead and cut carefully, not through the work, but just go ahead and cut that last bit of tail off, like that. You can also hide your work along the edge of the seam, just inside that edge stitch. That's another good spot for hiding your tails when you're finished. So, congratulations, you just finished your first project. For comparison, I thought I'd show you this scarf that I'm wearing was made on number 19 needles, and this one that we just finished is made on 17 needles. You can see that the gauge of this project, or the density of the ridges, is just a little smaller than it is on the size 19 needle, but either one will work just great. I love to wear this scarf over over a top and a pair of jeans with a little leather jacket or denim jacket, or toss it on when I'm going to work out over my tennis clothes or my workout clothes. It just seems to work with everything. It's very cozy and warm, but it just adds that stylish touch to any outfit you're gonna wear. Okay, so now here's the pattern for Jana's scarf. You can take a screenshot on your phone or iPad or computer so you can refer to it anytime. If you want to buy the materials, we do have them at loopsknitting.com. So click on the link below or go to loopsknitting.com, then click Shop by Project, then look for Jana's scarf. Now in our next video, I'm going to teach you the purl stitch, and I've got a new version of one of our most popular Loops original patterns for you.